Hi, and welcome to our monthly Pastors Briefing, sponsored by the Gleaning Church Network here at Gleaning for the World. I'm Mike Tilley, glad to have you with us for today's presentation. Ron Davidson will be sharing, and our topic today is community hunger and the church's perspective. You know, Gleaning for the World has distributed last year alone 513,000 meals across the United States, and this year we're on track to actually distribute more than 2 million meals in the U.S. And so Gleaning has a unique perspective and understands how to go about doing it in an efficient way that benefits both the end user, the person who needs that meal, as well as the church who's involved in ministering to the community and looking to grow the church body. So you're going to find this to be an interesting presentation today. Ron Davidson will be delivering it. And of course, Ron is the president and the founder of this 16-year-old nonprofit humanitarian aid ministry called Gleaning for the World. You can learn more about Gleaning at gftw.org. Folks are connecting into today's presentation, and as they do, I want to encourage you to think about any questions you may have, maybe some specific things for your community, your congregation. This is a good time to ask those. And there are tools on your page right now that you can use to ask questions during today's presentation. And when Ron's done with a more formal presentation, about 15 minutes or so, then we'll do a Q&A period. Also, don't forget that all of these sessions that we do every month are archived, and you can see how to access those. We've done things on ISIS, of course, what's happening in the Middle East, other major topics, Ebola, and others. So if you'd like to catch up on some of those things, we'd love for you to do that as well. Okay, we're going to go ahead and throw it over to Ron now for today's presentation. We hope, again, you'll ask questions, and we'll be back to talk more about those after the presentation.
The word train means to dedicate your child to the way of the Lord. It also means that you're going to help that child find his way in life. You're going to help him be trained and so that he can make a living. But when you train up or dedicate a child and the way of the Lord, it does not say the child will not depart when he is a young person, teenager, young adult, but it does say that the child will come back to the life that he has been trained in as a child. And we know that almost 80% of the habits of a child are developed before they're 3.5 years old, the habits that they will use as an adult. So the home life that the child is raised in will make a significant difference in the way that that child will train his children, will train his grandchildren. The scripture says that the sins of a generation are visited on a child for 3 generations. So when you look at my life, the way I've lived my life, trying to be dedicated to God's service and to care for people in need, that is passed to my children, is passed to my grandchildren, and is passed to my great-grandchildren. The opposite of these 2 scriptures is that if you do not train up a child in the way of the Lord, there is going to be a time when the ethical and moral decisions of the child is going to be used as an adult, which means that the child will not have the Christian principles to go back to. When it says that the sins of a generation are visited for 3 generations, the opposite is also true. When you train up a child in the way of the Lord and you live before that child the Christian life so that they can see not only in your words but also in your actions and your attitudes, the children learn that and they pass the good traits on for the next 3 generations. So if you want to do something that is really positive for your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, the best thing you can do, regardless of the age of your child, is to live before them a life that becomes the gospel, so that the gospel is real by action and by word. Part of what concerns me when we look at the generation today is what are we teaching the children? In particular, the children that are born into a bad family situation that are born into poverty. Uh, there has been an 8% increase in the last decade of children who are living in poverty. Now, 43%, almost half of our children, experience poverty at some point in their childhood. And that will affect them, it will affect their children, it will affect their grandchildren. We're looking at 16 million children who do not know on a daily basis where their food is coming from. One of my friends, one of my close friends, was raised in an impoverished situation. And we have talked for hours about the effect that it's had on his life. He happened to be the oldest adult male in his family. So when his father left, and it was his mother and 3 or 4 children, it was his job to go out and beg for and ask for food. And he said the hardest time was during the wintertime. He would go to the restaurants and open up the dumpsters and get the food out that was left over from people's plates, gather that food and take it home to his siblings. The problem was in the wintertime, the food was frozen. And he had a very difficult time trying to find enough unfrozen food that he could take back to his siblings. We know that the answer to poverty comes in simply good stewardship. 40% of the food that is produced in the United States that could be consumed by our people, 40% of that food is destroyed. Now, we're not just talking about food that is left on your plate. I mean, I grew up in a Christian family, and I always heard the thing, if you don't eat all your food, the people in China will starve. Well, I never made the connection in that at all. I didn't understand how not eating food on my plate in Virginia made a difference of someone else being hungry. But the reality is that of the food that is produced in the United States that is consumable, 40% of it is destroyed. That's equivalent to $165 billion in food that is destroyed that could be used. When we look at the homeless, and we'll have to remember that almost half of the homeless are under 15 years of age. When we look at the homeless, there are 3.5 million children that are homeless out of the 5.6 million people that are homeless at any given time. So 3.5 million of our children are living in homeless conditions. 1.6 million children on any given day are hungry. We're told that almost 1 million children at any given time are involved in our school system that do not have sufficient food, that are living in poverty. So again, 1 million children in our schools are homeless in the sense that there's not sufficient housing, there's not sufficient food. We also know that many of the children that are homeless have come from homes where there has been significant violence. The violence against women is growing at an alarming rate. I do not understand that personally, how a person can be committed to their wife, to their children, and at the same time have physical violence against the women. One of the greatest reasons that children leave home and that women leave with their children and become homeless is because the violence of the adult male in that home. That violence, it creates sometimes a dependency on drugs because the women and the children are looking for some way to deal with the isolation. They're trying to find some way to deal with the pain of not having a place to live, to deal with the violence in the home situation. We know that it generates great depression in the children. You can imagine, and maybe you can't because I don't think that I could, you could imagine a child that does not know where this food's coming from on any given day, that does not have the normal clothing and things that would be expected of a child in the school system, so they become the ones who are bullied. You can imagine a child that does not have enough protein in its diet to be able to learn. Uh, One of the stories that will forever stick with me came from the man that I mentioned earlier that used to go to the dumpsters and find the food for his children. He has become a tremendous advocate for placing food in the hands of the children that are hungry. Recently, he helped Gleaning for the World and several other organizations start a backpack ministry so that on Friday afternoon, the children that did not have food to eat during the weekend would be given a backpack, and it had nutritious food in it. And the children would take the backpack home on Friday and bring it back on Monday. They would refill it, and then the children would have food again the next weekend. One of the stories that he told uh, that came from a local teacher is that the teacher awarded children for good behavior, for great grades, for whatever. So every Friday, the teacher would single out one single child, take them and buy nabs and a soft drink for them, have a special time with them. And this one boy, she noticed that he acted up a lot on Monday morning and he acted up a lot on Friday afternoon. And she couldn't put the pieces together for a long time. And as she found out that this child from Friday night when he left school until Monday when he came back to school literally had nothing to eat. So the acting up on Monday morning was because he didn't have anything in his stomach to help him until he got back to school and had the free breakfast program. On Friday, he became so unruly because he knew that within a few hours there wouldn't be any food to eat for the next 2 or 3 days. So she found a way to be able to express appreciation to this young boy. And what she did is she took him out to the vending machine, and he wanted some cheese crackers, and she bought him the large pack of cheese crackers, sat down on the floor beside the vending machine and started talking to him, bought him a drink to have for the crackers. He ate half of the crackers and took the pack of crackers that was left and put it in his pocket. And the teacher saw that and was talking to him, and she said, "Why did you put the crackers in your pocket?" And he went on to explain that he had a younger brother and sister that night was not going to have anything to eat. So rather than eating all the crackers, he simply held the crackers back for his sibling. Now, that story is real. It is true. It is the life that almost half of our children live in the United States today. And my point is that it's absolutely unacceptable. No child in the United States should be hungry. No child should be hungry anywhere in the world. But particularly in a world where 40% of our food is destroyed that could be consumed, where $165 billion worth of food is thrown away, there is no excuse for that child to have to fold up the pack of crackers and put it in his pocket so that his younger sister and brother would have something to eat. One of the root causes that we find today with the homeless is there simply is not enough affordable housing. The minimum wage up until the last year was a little over $5 an hour. There are a lot of people that do not have the training and the preparation to work in today's workforce. Because of that, they're going to make $5 or $6 an hour. And I don't want to name a particular company, but some of the major retail stores that we have, over half of the people that work in those stores are making less than $7 an hour. Now, you look at the annual income from $6 to $7 an hour, and the people simply cannot afford to live in apartments. They can't afford to live in low-income housing. They simply can't afford a place to eat. They can't afford a place to live. They They simply live in a spiral that continues to go down. And that's why we have seen in the last 10 years almost a 1% per year increase in the number of people that are living in poverty. Even with the increase in the minimum wage today, we know that the people that are making minimum wage cannot afford to buy the food for the children. Now, so many times when I talk to people about the children and in our own communities, around our churches, and we talk about the poverty level, and we talk about the government funding of programs, and we talk about children that don't have food to eat, they think that the majority of the homeless are people that have mental conditions, that are drug and alcohol addicted, and that is true. Part of the homeless would fit in those categories. But the reality is that almost 80%, 88% of the people that are homeless are not in that category. They do not have mental conditions. They do not have problems with alcohol and drug abuse. But the reality is also there that the parents simply don't make enough money to feed the children. So as a church, what is our responsibility? First, we've got to reach out and be able to help feed the children. You can do a number of things as a church to be able to help the children in your community. One is providing an aftercare program, which is a program after school is over, where the children can come. There'll be mentors that are able to help them go through their homework. There are mentors that help them believe in themselves. There's snack food available. There's all kind of things that we can do in our church facility to be able to help our children learn and believe in themselves. One of the books that will come out in the next 3 or 4 months is a book that I wrote on building self-esteem in children. And the church will be able to order that, will be able to use it with the children, but it's opening the church building up after the school is open so that the children can come and be able to continue their education. Another thing is to be able to donate money to purchase food that you can give to the local feeding ministries. Another thing is you can collect used clothing. The people that live on the streets, that are living in dire straits in old buildings, that are living in cars, the back of buildings, the alleyways, even the ones that are living in facilities like the Salvation Army and other locations, they need good winter clothing. They don't need old stained winter clothing. They need good winter clothing, and all of us have those in our homes that we can donate. You can also begin to work with social services in your community because they have identified who these people are, and they can tell you within half a mile or a mile of your church who the people are that are in need so that you can reach out. One of the greatest things that we can do is to be able to take the scripture and share it with the people that are in need. Now, these are not dangerous people. We're talking about half of them being under 15 years of age. They're people that simply need someone to care. So there are a number of things that you can do, and one of the things that we do here is we bring in tractor trailer loads of sweet potatoes and white potatoes. We bag them in 10-pound bags, and then we give them out to the local community agencies. You can do that as a church. It takes about $5,000. People are willing to dedicate a certain amount of money for a 10-pound bag of potatoes that you can give them out to the local community people. You can raise the $5,000 within businesses, within industry, within individuals in your church and community. There are very few people who will not give money for it, and then you can give that food out. We have a video that shows one of the pack-a-thons recently that took place in Maryland, and I want you to look at what we did in bringing almost 200 volunteers from the community, and it'd be very easy to introduce these 200 people to your church as a giving community so that you can increase your attendance, you can increase your outreach in your local church area. So we want you to watch the video, and then we'll go to a question and answer time.
It's amazing. It really is. And then, I mean, I'm just one person, and I've done over 400. You can see there's 100 people here, and I mean, we're feeding the people that are just less fortunate.
And we are packing 8,000 of these buckets today. We have 80,000 pounds of potatoes, 40,000 sweet potatoes, 40,000 white potatoes. They come from North Carolina and Maine. And with this effort today, with all these volunteers, we're going to make 80,000 meals.
Well, frankly, this is what we do. Gleaning for the World. The people involved with Gleaning for the World are impassioned by the fact that so much can be done with so little. They wouldn't be here unless they did that. You can take your time, your money, and other resources and create so much good from so little. So when you talk about 70, 80,000 meals being generated from a few hours of work for people, it's highly gratifying, but I got to tell you, that's what we do.
Well, I've seen all the great impacts Gleaning has had around the world, and I thought, geez, we ought to try and bring Gleaning to our backyard, Washington, D.C., where we have such an opportunity to make an impact for the less fortunate.
I just thought it was a really neat idea. I've never seen anything like hacking potatoes, so I thought it would be very nice to do.
This community wants to help, and given the opportunity on such a beautiful day and such a beautiful venue and for such a worthy cause, it's not hard to get people to come out here and help. And as you can see, there's a lot of happiness here. People are having fun.
One of the funny things that took place just a couple of years ago, I was literally on the road heading to vacation in Tennessee. I love to go to a horse farm there and spend a week working with the horses. And I got a call from the staff that said, "You've got to come back to the office." So I came back to the office. They had a tractor trailer that was a dump truck. And the tractor trailer simply lifted up its body and dumped about 44,000 pounds of sweet potatoes in our driveway. And what they wanted was for me to climb on top of literally a mountain of potatoes and get my picture taken setting on the potatoes so that we could use it in the local press that afternoon. And so help me, I had the picture taken. I had no problem doing that, but I smelt a little funny because I had a few rotten potatoes I'd been sitting on, and I had to live with that for a 7-hour trip. But the reality is what you saw, we've done it in Southern Maryland. We did it with McLean Bible Church in Northern Virginia. We've done it a number of times here. We used to bring in 5 to 6 tractor trailer loads, which is 250,000 pounds of potatoes, invite the community in. We would be able to distribute the potatoes, but we would have 300 to 350 people that would show up the second week of January to pack 250,000 pounds of potatoes, and they could do it within 2 hours. So it gives you an opportunity as a church to invite people to come to your church that would never come any other way, so that you could introduce them to the gospel, introduce them to humanitarian work, and because of that, be able to feed a child that would be hungry. So some of you sent some questions in, so Mike, let's work with them.
Yeah, we'll go right into the questions, and if you have any, you can actually go ahead and ask them now online. There are tools to do that, and we'd love for you to do it. I was just thinking, Ron, before we get to the questions, as you were pointing out, McLean Bible Church was one of the churches up in Northern Virginia that you've done this with, and I was thinking how, I mean, you just look for every creative way to be able to help people. I mean, the sky is the limit, and you've uncovered all of these unbelievable type of methods and creative solutions to help hungry people. And really, any church can do that, right? I mean, there are all kinds of opportunities and resources in their own community. They just have to look for them.
One of the things that we do, obviously, in disasters is we go to the local Sam's Club, Walmart, Kmart, different locations, and we put up posters and we allow people to donate food. Any local church could go to a retailer and get permission to do a collection. And believe it or not, there have been times we've collected tractor trailer loads of bottled water and food, and you don't have to buy it. People will give it to you, as well as give you funds to help pay for the cost of the program. But the key is to find the unusual thing that will create the attention for the local church, and at the same time be able to do good in your community. And there are a lot of different avenues to do that. So, yeah, gleaning for the world and being attention deficit, I'm not good at concentrating on anything very long. So we try to find the most unique way to be able to feed the homeless, to be able to feed the children. One lady called me yesterday, and she used a phrase that I had not heard. And the phrase was the new homeless. And of course, my first question is, who are the new homeless? Mm-hmm. The new homeless are our children that are being raised by uncles and aunts and friends and grandparents because they cannot live in the home because of the violence and the problems that are there, and because many of the homes don't have food to feed the children. Wow. So children living with neighbors and family members have become the new homeless. And we're talking about almost 1 million children that are living in that type of circumstance today. So finding ways to reach these children can change them for a lifetime when they see Christian people being Christian and helping them.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know you've shared with us here in the office, and I don't know if you've had a chance to share with pastors yet or not, that it's an amazing experience for church members when they not only come on Sunday mornings and they're blessed by Bible teaching and worship time, but when they can practically do something during the week, like a potato pack-a-thon or other ways that they can physically help people. It's remarkable the kind of energy and enthusiasm that brings to a church.
Well, we know from George Bonner and some of the studies that he has done that 38 million people that were active born-again Christians have walked away from the church in the last 10 years. That's 38 million people. It is projected that in the next decade, in the next 10 years, we're going to lose another 70 million people who are going to walk away from the church. So that's 100 million people in 20 years that just walk away from the church, not mad at anybody. They just don't feel like the church is helping them. Mm-hmm. Now, the study, the most important piece of that to me is not only the membership that we're losing in the local church, but 68% of those who have left the local church that are not going to church anywhere, 68% said they would come back to the local church if they were invited to help do humanitarian work. Mm-hmm. They're not opposed to the scripture, and they're not opposed to sharing the scripture. They just want hands-on activity making a difference, as opposed to just sitting in a pew and listening to a sermon. Yeah. So if we're going to be the church that God has called us to be, then we have got to reach out and do what the church has not done for years, which is reach out and make a difference in the lives of the people in our own community. And where there are poor, where there are homeless, where there are hungry children, that the church has got to quit worrying about what kind of music they're singing. They've got to quit worrying about, how you're supposed to dress when you come to church, that they're irrelevant. What we need to do is put people back to work doing ministry, and then the people that have left the church will come back. So it will transition the church as much as it will help the people that are in need.
Really just being the hands and feet of Christ and helping in your community. And then what we've observed is that it opens up the hearts of the people to then hear the gospel. And then you have the opportunity to have not only the physical impact in our world, but also you're able to have the spiritual impact, which is our primary directive. And so it all goes hand in hand. It's just another means by which we can communicate the gospel and have an impact. A few questions. We don't have much time left in our session today, but one question says, should my congregation participate in a pantry program, like a food pantry program, or should we pool our resources together with a broader program like a local community food bank?
Well, there are many programs already out there that know who needs the food as opposed to those who may come to get it. Mm-hmm. We know that there are some people that will hit a number of different locations and fill their truck up or their car up with food. The local community groups need help and support. So if you can collect food and give it to the local groups that are doing the distribution, the Christian ministries, and you can go put your hands on it and actually help give the food out. It helps the group have a broader mission, but it also helps the local church because you're doing the hands-on. So I don't recommend that the church take on a large pantry because it just takes up a lot of time and a lot of effort. It takes a third of the time to do the collection and give it to the people that are already doing the ministry and do the hands-on work with them. It does the same benefit. It offers the same benefit, but it also helps the church continue to do what it's already doing.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And I know Gleaning has done some big gives in the past. Sometimes it's more clothing oriented than necessarily food, but there are ways to even bring positive attention to a church whereby Gleaning comes in sort of behind the scenes, provides all of the, whether it's the food or whether it's clothing or whatever. The church is really the face of that, and maybe in your parking lot you do a big deal where you're distributing this to people in need, and it connects people to your church in a positive way. And you've done that kind of thing in a lot of cities.
Yeah, it's one of the new things that I just learned recently that some inner city churches are doing. There are vacant lots, a lot of them within the inner city. And they got permission from the local chamber and the local government. And the churches literally went in and took over a half a dozen lots. They planted a big garden so they could show people how to raise their own food. Mm-hmm. The church members and the community got together and worked the garden. They gave the food out. I know of one group that recently went to a farmer that was working about 1,500, 1,700 acres and said, can you take 20 acres and plant it in a garden? We'll work it. Mm-hmm. And the farmer was more than glad. He broke up the soil. He prepared the soil for the garden. He put the fertilizer down. The community members bought the seed and they planted it. They had 20 acres of garden. 20 acres of garden will produce tractor trailer loads of food.
Right.
And just going out and asking somebody to help you can make all the difference, whether you're in the inner city or whether you're in a rural area. And we sometimes think that the inner city is where the poor are, but the reality is there are more poor in the rural areas than there are in the inner city. Mm. So whether you're a rural church or a downtown church, there are ways that you can get involved. We planted, when I was one of the churches in Gloucester, Virginia, we planted 7.5 acres of sweet corn. We got 2 tractor trailer loads of sweet corn that we gave it all over the state of Virginia. And the church still, some 25 years later, is talking about that sweet corn that they went out and harvested. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to do the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, we're going to wrap up. We've enjoyed being with you today. You know, remember, this is all about the gospel. And several decades ago, tent revivals were happening everywhere. Television came along, and there were a lot of televangelists everywhere sharing the gospel. Planting churches is a big deal, and a lot of people in recent years have focused on that. But this is really the next wave of how you can actually evangelize your community, is by using humanitarian aid to reach the poor, to reach the needy, and also to use your members in a way to band together on a common project to then energize your church again. So if your church is just sort of limping along a little bit, this is an excellent way to re-energize them, ultimately to share the gospel, but initially to help in things that they recognize easily as members, and use their spiritual gifts to accomplish that. So Ron and I have enjoyed being with you, and remember, all the sessions are archived. You can look at other sessions on the site. Our next monthly pastor's briefing will be on April 16th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That's a Thursday, so mark your calendar, and we'll see you then. For Ron, I'm Mike Tilley. Thanks for joining us today. We hope this was helpful to you.
God bless.